Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Ana Principi, and I am the Undersecretary of Institutional Relations and International Cooperation at the School of Humanities and Educational Science at the National University of La Plata. I would like to welcome you all to this, the second cycle of conferences we are holding as part of this new joint project between the USA and Argentina, shared dialogues on gender, ethnicity, geopolitics, history, and memory. The project is one of the beneficiaries of the US Embassy in Argentina's grant program for cooperation and exchange projects. The University of La Plata is extremely grateful to the Embassy for choosing and sponsoring this series of conferences. I'd particularly like to thank the Assistant Cultural Officer, Mr. Michael McLean, and the specialists Noris Cerdá and Giselle Dubinsky for all their support and hard work during the preparation process. Also, I would like to thank a María Laura Espoturno, a Cecilia Chacho, a Emek Ergun, and Alicia Partnoy for preparing these 4 conferences that we are holding today and tomorrow. At today's sessions, we'll hear from Dr. Alicia Partnoy, and María Laura Espoturno will introduce her.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. So I have the pleasure to introduce you to Alicia Partnoy. Alicia Partnoy is a poet, scholar, and human rights activist. She's better known for the little school, Tales of Disappearance and Survival, La Escuelita, Relatos Testimoniales, which is about her experience as a disappeared person during Argentina's last military dictatorship. Partnoy is the author, editor, or translator of 13 books. Her most recent testimonial text is a collaboration with Martina Giselle Ramirez, Happier as a Woman, Transforming Friendships, Transforming Lives. Partnoy's work has been published in French, Hebrew, Bengali, English, and Spanish. Her research in the areas of testimonial text and business poetry has appeared in interdisciplinary journals and collections. She is co-founder of Proyectos Voices of Survivors and International Network of Victims and Survivors. Dr. Partnoy is Professor Emerita at Loyola Marymount University in LA. So, Alicia, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Muchísimas gracias. This is wonderful. I treasure every opportunity of returning to the country. And thank you, María Laura, and thank you for the sponsors. I'm going to share a screen. I have a PowerPoint, which is mostly a slideshow, I think. I got too excited with this. And what happens is that I retired a year ago from teaching. So any opportunity for me to lecture is welcome, but also I'm a bit rusty. Okay, so I'm gonna discuss, and the slides have some translations into Spanish, testimonial texts by women, Exile translation and solidarity networks. And for la primera parte de mi presentación, voy a hablar sobre algunas reflexiones personales sobre el exilio, el concepto de discurso de la solidaridad y ofrecer algunas notas, algunos apuntes para clasificar textos testimoniales con ejemplos de poesía como texto testimonial. After my presentation, that's going to be answers and questions because I'm asking you questions. And also there is a second part to my presentation in which I will discuss, voy a hablar más sobre la traducción, la publicación y la construcción de redes solidarias. I now call them comunidades de solidaridad, comunidades en solidaridad. So I'll talk about my my anthology, You Can Run the Fire, but some texts by the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo and other communities of solidarity. And then there will be some questions. And after that, you will have a little break. So between my presentation and Maria Laura's, okay? So this is how it will go. Oh, yes, of course, I'm rusty, as I told you. And okay, a little gossip first, un poquito de chisme. This is how we were when we arrived as exiles from Argentina in 1980 into Seattle, Washington. So you can see me here. You can see my daughter, Ruth, and her father, Carlos. And then here is my husband of 40 years and partner. And here is the boyfriend I had upon arrival. And they're all friends. And this is what you're going to remember from my presentation, if you don't remember anything else, is the gossip. I had a thing for men who had been political prisoners during the Argentinian dictatorship. Okay, the reflection is, I always say that is almost always easier that your body goes back to your country of origin than your work. And in my experience, it took 5 years for my body to return to the country, and that was because of the struggle, the fight of my people. It took 20 years for my book, The Little School, to go back to my country, although I wrote it in Spanish. It went back as a manuscript to the relatives of the disappeared and human rights organizations, but it took 20 years, and I want to thank Marta Bermudez, she might be in the audience, who was the scholar who was one of the first scholars in the United States, an Argentine scholar who wrote about my work, and when nobody paid any attention to my work. And then she also made a contact with the publishing house, La Bohemia, Gabriela País, and poets and editor Daniel Mujica. The Little School took 18 years to go back to Argentina, and thanks to the internet, and poet Diego Rosaque from my country, from my city of Bahia Blanca, who found me online and said, these poems have to come back to my city. And he published this kind of work. And my scholarship came back, took 18 years to go back to Argentina. And that's thank you to Gabriela Marrón, Professor Marrón at the Universidad Nacional del Sur, my first college I attended, and the humanities department. In 2015, I could teach there. But the poetry of my daughter, who came into exile with me as a little girl, 4 years old, took 20 years. She published her first little chapbook in 2001. And in 2021, your school, the Universidad de La Plata, I was telling my husband, because he is a graduate from he studied at the University of La Plata. Your school is amazing. So the magazine, Aletheia, the journal, the academic journal, and Emiliano Tavernini took our work, the work of my daughter, back to Argentina. There is a little link there in that magazine last year. You've all been exposed to this poster, and this is the work of my mother, Raquel Partnoy, her series Women of Tango. And in there, she this is a painting about which my daughter Ruth writes in that Aletheia article that I mentioned. And so I'm going to take you to a couple of stanzas from Ruth's work related to this painting, and because I translated it, but it was with the with the input of my daughter. So I know Maria Laura works about a lot on self-translation, And I know Emek will talk about virginity, so I thought this is the stance I wanted to share. There are two highlighted expressions and words there that you'll see what happened. The English version, the original says, "You just need to know how to crack a cunt in the right place," says the torturer, handing the ink and stamp to the secretary in charge of censoring and withholding the letters written by the caged mothers to their children. So when I translated it to ask my daughter, "Do you want Argentine slang for cunt?" And she said, "Yes, una concha está bien." So that's what I translated there. And then the word is not their children in the Spanish translation. And she was excited to see that the crías has more of an animal context, and it would fit better than children in the translation. So she approved of this translation. Our return together to Argentina took 32 years, our literary return. We returned together in 84. So, and when Siete Sellos, the publishing in La Pampa, published the letters I wrote from prison to her, and with an introduction in which she writes as a girl whose mom is disappeared. And so we went to the book fair in 2016. I took the book to the book fair, but then later she came with me and we went to Bahía Blanca and presented the escucha. Okay. And now this is not so much fun. I want to present or offer some classification attempt for testimonial texts. I know a lot has been written about this, and I apologize, but I also ask you for input for any new leads that you can give me. I doubt that I will write another scholarly article because I'm retiring and I want to write fiction, novels, other kinds of things. But this will be very helpful for me to know better. So what I am working with testimonial texts, I know a lot of people, mostly talk about testimonio as the work by Rigoberta Menchú, this kind of work in which a testimonial subject tells a story to someone else, and it circulates as a book mediated by this, mostly a writer, an anthropologist. Well, I'm saying that testimonial texts can be, and I'll get into that a bit later, can be any texts, any not necessarily written texts, any texts that build a discourse of solidarity and inspire those who receive them to take a position and or to take a stand and fight against injustice suffered by the person who testifies there. The problem with testimonial texts, and I observed that in my decades in academia, is that they have privileged, the academic world have privileged the truth factor of testimonial texts, and in doing that, and always talking about, is this true? When is not true? Concentrating on that, and the objectivity, which should be left more for the legal environment, for the judiciary courts, the academic world sort of took a hold of what is true and defined what are real testimonials and which ones have to circulate. The academic world always concentrates on objectivity. So some of my friends, former prisoners, former disappeared people who are scholars, they wrote about the text written by victims, but they didn't disclose the fact that they themselves had been victimized, so they wouldn't be challenged in their objectivity. Okay, well, here is the whole Beatriz Sarlo debate and all that we can talk later. So to be able to tackle this, and this is very old from my dissertation back in 1998. It's 1988. It's very, I'm sorry, in 1998, but I'll come back to this. These are some concepts that I used back then. Discourse not as the spoken word, not as the text itself, but as the social process in which en el proceso social en que los textos están insertos, ¿verdad? Y luego el tema de los sistemas logonómicos y cómo estos sistemas logonómicos restringen el comportamiento a través de regulaciones, reglas que prescriben, que dicen cuál y cómo debe ser la producción semiótica. When these logonomic systems focus on the texts, they are the ones that help us classify texts according to genres, literary genres, and what the contents of these genres should be, and what what kind of reception will these genres receive. And so I'm concentrating too, I'm using this element, and I'll show you a classification where I use these elements on the semiotic plane according to Hodge and Kress, right, in this book, Social Semiotics. And he says, they write that the semiotic plane, el plano semiótico, es donde los eventos semióticos se producen y los receptores y los productores de los textos y los significantes y los significados están combinados en relaciones significativas. Estas estructuras semióticas pueden ser definidas en términos de horizontales o verticales. Entonces, para mí, las estructuras horizontales, parataxis. So these two concepts, parataxis and hypotaxis, are the ones that I'm working with. And I'm working with the concept of parataxis because what I'm saying is that the discourse of solidarity implies paratactic relationships, non-hierarchical relationships between those who produce the text, who circulate the text, who access this text. And you can find those in the paratexts, in the prefaces, in the illustrations, in the ways, in the blurbs, in all these things in the books. So I worked with testimonial poetry books, examining all these aspects. In this classification, that in this dissertation limbo, it's still in dissertation limbo. It's a place where they send your PhD dissertations and they keep them there. And it's vintage 1997, and I'm not sure it's a good wine that can keep for so long. But if you want the whole text, I still have to work with the graphics and you'll see why, but I could send it to you. And I'll upload it to academia.edu, which I'm sure everybody knows. Para quienes no lo saben, academia.edu es una especie de Facebook para académicos. Entonces, todos y todas podemos entrar allí. Bien, okay. So this is my attempt, and it's very rusty because it was done by a friend of mine like decades ago. But I want to show you a couple of things here. My attempt of classification. So the literary text I'm working with logonomic systems, systems that define what is theater, what is poetry, what is short story, what's a novel. And then I'm talking about non-literary texts because these are the testimonials represented which have an artistic element, and the non-represented testimonies that are marches, demonstrations, letters, pamphlets. In the represented testimonies, non-literary text, you find dance, like the dance now, El violador eres tú, for instance. That's one of the, back then when I did this, I was thinking on La Cueca Sola in Chile, for instance. Paintings, photographs. Now, you'll notice some bubbles here. So the bubbles are signifying literariness. The things that, and so you see an overflow of these bubbles into movie, film, non-documentary film. You see an overflow of these bubbles into life testimonio. ¿Verdad? But then there is this dark space, and this is what I call the discourse of solidarity. This has to be revisited and updated, but you see that some categories are outside this discourse of solidarity. And among these categories, I have the police, the report to the police, the denunciation, because back in Argentina, where I disappeared, my parents presented a habeas corpus. There was no solidarity in that fact. They didn't know if it was going to be useful, nobody. And today in Argentina, this should be updated, and maybe there is, because when I testified today in the court of law against the genocide perpetrators from the little school, I have all the solidarity of this environment around me, and the judiciary system is in solidarity with me. Something that does not happen to the victims of feminicide in Argentina most of the times, even when they have the comisarías de la mujer, the police stations for women. I mean, it's problematic. So within each of these categories, we have three different modes of testimonial. We have for instance, theater based on testimonial, theater with a testimonial value, and testimonial theater. And I'll share some examples with poetry. I say that poetry is the Cinderella of testimonial poetry. Testimonial poetry is the Cinderella of testimonial. Why? Because literary people consider that it doesn't have any literary value. And testimonial texts, people think it doesn't have a truth value. It's not about the truth. Poetry is not about the truth. So, although some people say it's more the truth than any other truth. So I'm going to share within testimonial poetry a poem by Eve de Bonafini. Then poetry based on testimonial. There is a poem by Dacia Maraini, and I'm going to show you that. And then in poetry with testimonial value, I'll show you a poem by one of the victims of one of the disappeared girls. Okay, So the testimonial poetry that I'm going to share comes from this book by the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo. They published these books during the dictatorship. They sold them in the plaza. They still sell them in this table in the Plaza de Mayo. And many of the names of the poets were anonymous because they were in danger and they for publishing this. So from there is this poem by Eve de Bonafini. She is one of the founders of Madres de Plaza de Mayo. Realidad. 30 de marzo, 17 horas, la convocatoria. Como siempre, las madres van con el grito ahogado. Queremos nuestros hijos, digan dónde están. 4 de la tarde, salen de la casa, estalla la represión, los azules cazan, llevan a 3.000. 6 madres van presas, apunta el fusil. 10 de abril, 11 de la mañana, la plaza colmada, la gente gritaba, sentí que en mis venas la sangre estallaba, que en cada latido mi cuerpo vibraba, esa sangre mía en nombres lloraba, Jorge, Roberto, Raúl, Manuel, Maneli, María Elena, Ariel, realidad que quema como una condena. Eve de Bonafini. In the same book, there is this poem by Dacia Maraini. And so with my translator, Gail Ronsky, who translates my poetry, who's my voice in English for poetry, is my close friend, we loved this poem. She translated it. Then we found out, ignorant me, who Dacia Maraini was. And so we thought it was a mother of Plaza de Mayo. Todos los jueves, señor general, me enrulo el pelo, me pinto los labios para encontrar la amistad y el dolor en la Plaza de Mayo. Every Thursday, Mr. General, I curl my hair, put on lipstick to meet friendship and pain at the Plaza de Mayo. And this is Dacia Maraini, a very well-known feminist writer from Italy. But I didn't know. So here you can see how these solidarity networks start building around our works and the works of the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo. So poetry with testimonial value, and this is a book published by the relatives of the disappeared, with a preface by Ernesto Sabato, a very well-known writer who was also head of the Commission to Investigate Disappearances after when the first democratic government that after the dictatorship came. And Sabato didn't have any power to enter concentration camps, to summon anything. And so it was sort of a bit of lip service, but he was well known, and so they put him there. So justice didn't come to Argentina until like decades after. Anyways, he wrote this preface, and I take him to test on this because first, if you examine the semiotic aspects on this cover, you'll see that the names of those disappeared people who wrote the poems are not there on the cover. His name is prominent, is in the same color as the title of the book. And in the preface, he says, regardless of the literary value of these works, these kids suffered and their relatives suffered a lot. And so that's why I'm accepting their request to write this preface. So I see here when I talk about parataxis, relationships, he climbs his high horse as a writer, right? And so he establishes this hypotaxis, the superiority over them as a writer. And that's the kind of thing I look at. So in the book, there is this poem with testimonial value. Why? Because regardless of the content of the poem, and we can think of the writings by Rodolfo Walsh, like his plays, his theater plays that are pretty amazing, and they don't denounce, they are not a testimonial of what happened to him, but they are bringing his presence back into the world, and they are making the readers aware of what happened to these people. So this is Franca Harris. She was born in 1957. She was a high school student when she was disappeared on June 25th, 1976. And her poem talks about a shanty town, right? This is this young girl, and in there she says, she looks into a shanty town from a wall, and then she sees inside a little girl who is 13 years old, about my age, the writer says, and she's selling lemons. And then she talks about this filthy place that is surrounded by walls and is dirty with human crimes that are just our crimes. That's what she writes. Okay, I thought I was I was talking too much, but I think this is working. And well, I was rushing through this, but there will be time for your answers. So my questions to you now: can the discourse of academia be a discourse of solidarity? So think about what the discourse of academia is about. What are the components? What are the interactions? And how a discourse of solidarity is built. And also thinking about what hierarchies, right? Do we have horizontal structures? Do we have hierarchies? What do those hierarchies do to us in academia? And how do we work with that? Then if we wanted to classify the most recent texts, because I'm talking about arpilleras, right? Those tapestries produced in Chile, denouncing the disappearances. I'm talking about songs, but now we have Twitter, we have Instagram, we have blogs, we have a lot of other forms of communication that were not around in 1998 when I produced that reinvention of the wheel, I call it, sort of, you know. And so can we find any of those examples in any of these categories with testimonial base, with a testimonial value, or testimonial YouTube videos? For instance, we are in YouTube, and I take this chance to say hello to all my friends that are there in YouTube, probably, and all the people who have registered. So think about that. And then I know I'm behind. I am putting together a bibliography of testimonial texts, but I am pretty behind on that. So if you want to share some of that, and of course, if you want to ask questions, please ask questions, and then we'll go to the second part of my presentation after we talk about this. I'm gonna look into the chat. They tell me that there is a delay in the way this is conducted. I don't know if everybody can see the chat from there. I hope not. But then maybe the moderators will jump in, and I don't know. So, gracias Silvana Fernández. Bueno, muchísimas gracias por tu saludo. So now I'm here with my colleagues, waiting for the questions from the audience. And
so far, there are no questions on YouTube. I have some questions. I have one question. I mean, sorry, it's from another slide before this one. Could you elaborate a little about the classification, poesía testimonial, poesía de base testimonial, and poesía con valor testimonial?
Sí. Okay, poesía testimonial, testimonial poetry would be the work written by the testimonial subject. In this case, the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo, or by the testimonial subject reporting about the situation of human rights violations and reporting about her life. I mean, a lot of the poetry written in prisons. I also worked with poetry written in during the Holocaust in the ghettos. And so some of that, for instance, is humor. Some poems that I have read are not about the situation there, but there's something else. And so then those will have a testimonial value. I mean, we read them and we know they were written by these victims. And so we think about them, we stand in solidarity with them. And in the case of the disappeared, you must take into account this attempt of erasure from, from life, and not only killing the people, but disappearing they as human beings who contributed to society. So when the relatives of the disappeared put together Desde el Silencio, they made a point at having their photographs there. Their photographs there had this testimonial value. Then there is the work inspired by the experience. And sometimes that work is in solidarity, and but sometimes I'm thinking of cases in which sometimes the testimonial is used as a way of, there is a parody of the testimonial in some novels, in some texts, and it could be based on a reality, but it's not really building this discourse of solidarity. But in this case, it's building it in such a way that Dacia Maraini doesn't stand out as a writer, well-known writer. She's just one more person in this book. And it confused us and it made us think, oh, she's one of them. She could have, there could have been another identification. And some of the others, it says they are, political prisoners. They could have said, this is, a famous writer, validating this. No, she chooses to be, or the mothers choose to put her at the same level. This is produced by the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo, there are some questions in the chat. So
Thank you so much.
It goes, yeah, okay. Okay. The question of whether academia can truly embody a sense of solidarity is a very complicated one, most definitely. Thank you for saying that, right? It's a very complicated one. And nobody else is talking about that. someone else. Thank you. I want to mention Julia, because Julia is my translator now of my poetry. She was a student of mine. So building these networks, this solidarity network, she's my voice in English now for Ecos Lógicos y Otros Poemares. So another thank you about these testimonials were not very well known, and this is someone who writes in Spanish. So yes, I know, because when I went to Argentina to teach this class, this graduate course that at the University of Nacional del Sur, I realized that people haven't read Rigoberta Menchú the way, I mean, I forced my students, my undergrad students to read her, but in Argentina they hadn't. And of course they hadn't read the work by the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo. They were not in their libraries. And so that in this some little seed I plant there, I want to donate my library sooner rather than later to people who can use it there, because there is no access. Okay, Julia continues this elaboration. On one hand, it seems like testimonials and the voices of survivors can be given a sense of legitimacy when they are discussed in academic circles, which they would not always receive otherwise, right? But at the same time, the fact that they are being discussed in academic circles is not what lends them legitimacy, right? And I'm thinking, when I brought this issue, because this issue I'll show you I discussed in an article in the flagship publication of Modern Languages in PMLA, and I presented this essay, some parts of this article in Argentina in 2006 at a conference, and when I questioned Beatriz Sarlo's position about the truth and who, I mean, on why the testimonial subjects cannot tell the truth and stuff like that, like 5 or 6 people stood up and left in protest. And so they were taking away any validation because, you know, I was challenging their favorite scholar. Belén Rodríguez Salvatierra, with respect to this course of academia, I think that things have started to change, but it has been slow. This is a Chilean studying for her master's in translation in Chile. Wonderful. Okay, and she, and you know, in my work, that dissertation that is so rusty, I worked with poetry books from Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay. So if you're interested, I can, and she talks about the Mutatis Mutandis edition of 2020, which was pretty amazing. It was a big step towards solidarity in a wider sense. Okay, I think, I don't know, it's, yeah, if there are more, if there are more questions, or if the moderators want to.
Can I say a word, Alicia?
Please.
Yeah, thank you. This was really inspiring. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking about the fact that I grew up in Turkey, on the other side of the world, and I actually grew up with stories that were traveling in translation to Turkey, all these kind of stories about disappearances all across kind of South America. I mean, I still remember some of them, particularly from Chile, I remember. It's but it's just fascinating that this discourse of solidarity and how it embraces translation, and like none of these stories that you're telling actually are quote unquote foreign to me. Like I grew up with them
on, you know, some other part of the world because they were being translated. So thank you.
And thank you, Meg, because she helped me with a mystery I have been carrying for many years. And there's something called WorldCat. WorldCat is where you see all the publications that you have ever written or published in the audiences. And there was something there written in Turkish and published in 1988. And all these years I've been like, what the heck is that? And so yesterday I sent it to Meg and I said, oh, when we are done with these seminars, could you please tell me what this is about? And so Meg found out. Can you tell me what you found out, Meg?
Yeah, so I mean, they translated Alicia's book. Obviously, I was joking saying at that time copyright didn't matter much because, you know, they don't know about it. But I'm not familiar with the publisher. It seems like a leftist publisher. They had published other works on Lenin and this and that. But yeah, they translated her book and published it. And I'm going to Turkey in July. I will try to find a copy. But it's just fascinating that, you know, that this, I mean, it's 1988 also. That is 8 years after Turkey had its worst military coup. So that is also interesting that it was published you know, during that time. And so I'll definitely look more into it. It's really, yeah, it's fascinating. I want to see how it was translated and if they put a preface to it, right? All these questions.
Right. So now in my introduction, I can say that my works were translated into Turkish too. And but also, it also is a big revelation for me because in 2019, my book, The Little School, became a play, theater play in Nepal. And I'm gonna reach out and show you. So my daughter Eva went with me. Eva did my role along with her friend Janae in The Little School. It's very hard. Oops, what happened?
So we can see the photo bigger. Can you show it again?
Thank you. Okay. So the audience can see the photo too. And so when I went to Nepal then for this, and I played the testimonial subject, the writer there on a stage, I thought it was going to be fun because my daughter Eva is an actor. And I said, oh, this is an opportunity for her to act in Nepal. And I had to memorize all my texts in English. And it was not an easy thing to do. But you see this because disappearances were happening in Nepal, right? And so I made connections with the relatives of the disappeared in Nepal. But one of the things, and that's the Turkish connection, is Turkish Airlines was co-sponsoring this theater, because there were people traveling from outside the world. So they had offered, the organizer said, oh, Turkish Airlines will pay for your ticket to come here. Well, time went by and Turkish Airlines never delivered. And then they went to the embassy and to discuss this. And there was something about me not being a very kosher person for Turkish Airlines. And for some reason that was always a mystery to me. I do have a Kurdish writer that I connect and relate to. And I went to an event in which he spoke in the States, and the Turkish embassy was there, and I challenged those guys with their questions. But I'm not, I mean, a combination. So thank you. So So I'm not going to Turkey in the near future. So thank you for bringing the book to me. So I don't know if there are more questions or comments, or we should go to the second part of the presentation. I see people agreeing to that. Oops, sorry. Okay, and okay. So nobody's offering me stuff for my future article, which I will never write. And but I thought those questions were kind of interesting, but obviously they are not. And so they're food for thought and for the future. Okay, so now let me talk a bit about the process of translating, publishing, and the solidarity networks, which are also, now I call them communities of solidarity. Aquí estoy hablando sobre, esto es el prefacio de mi libro, You Can Drown the Fire, y entonces allí estoy hablando sobre cómo después de la publicación de mi libro, La Escuelita, la gente, yo sentí que hacía falta más voces de latinoamericanas, mujeres latinoamericanas que habían sido víctimas de represión. Y entonces aquí empiezo a hablar de estas redes de profesores universitarios, estudiantes, gente en el movimiento pacifista, gente en el movimiento de derechos humanos, feministas, y que querían estos textos. Entonces pensé que estos textos serían útiles y see, my publisher, Cleas Press, was the one that offered. You know, you always go to publishers and ask them, will you publish this? No, they say, we'll do this. We'll do this. We think there is that feeling, that is this need. I felt very lonely telling the stories, and also the danger in the States is that you become the individual, right? That is the hero. And that was something that was totally against what I wanted to do. So they published, and I started to look for manuscripts, and I wanted to destroy stereotypes about Latin American women, denounce the political repression in our countries, and build cultural bridges. This was never published in Argentina. Some people wanted me, and there was somebody, I believe, also at the University of La Plata, who said, oh, I want to translate and publish this. So this is the book, and it's edition in England, so Cleas, and in England by Virago Press, a feminist press. And they decided on a different cover, right? And it's accessible. It's been scanned in academia.edu. You can access that, and also in my official sitio oficial del internet pueden leer estos libros. Pero voy a hablar un poquito de las argentinas. Primero los traductores. Okay, I didn't have a cent. I was very poor back then, and these were all volunteer translators. And there are a couple of Argentines there, most recognizable, Maria Negroni, our dear poet, Maria Negroni, and then Marcela Cohen, a journalist, and but then you recognize Margaret Randall, right? And she was also a translator, and her mother, Eleanor Randall, who is a wonderful translator of Jose Marti, also volunteered. So all these people volunteered to translate. Most of them were born in the United States, but were working in the solidarity movement with Latin America. So one of the authors is Mercedes Sosa, of course, the singer. And I got hold of a text by her. You have to remember that there was no internet back then. There was no email. So anything went through via snail mail. And in less than a year, so if they're missing, if the people who should be there, for instance, there is no representation of the Caribbean. And it was my fault. Didn't have the networks, didn't do the work on that, and said, well, I'll see what I get, and with what I get. And I solicited Luisa Valenzuela to the permission to translate this text. And Luisa Valenzuela back then was the main Argentine writer. It's like the Isabel Allende now, right? The writer from Argentina in exile, the voice. And the solidarity that she showed me and she shared with me was amazing. Same with Claribel Alegría, but Luisa Valenzuela, because I'm discussing texts about women, so women from Argentina. So Luisa also invited me to be part of a workshop that she taught at the Institute of Policy Studies, a writing workshop, and she also invited me to lecture at Columbia University, talking about validation, right? But Columbia didn't want to pay me much. So I went because I needed to travel. I needed to pay for babysitters to leave my kid. It wasn't easy to be going around and doing things back then. And but Luisa was not there. This was 1988 because her mother was sick. And so, who hosted me? Jean Franco. Jean Franco, who wrote the blurb to You Can Drown the Fire. So here you see, right? And Jean Franco, So I have to confess, I was on a panel with two other panelists, and this was 1988. I hadn't been studying for a PhD yet. I didn't understand one thing the panelist, this man sitting by me, was saying, and it was totally the discourse of academia, but I wasn't familiar with that. But then Jean Franco allowed. And this is a little souvenir, just chisme, because I made a point of paying royalties. So I sent money orders, and then the advance that I got from Virago, and I never got more royalties. I divided between the 35 contributors, and each of them got $66. So here is the money order I sent to Luisa. And then I took also a later money order for $36 in royalties. And she said, nobody comes here from the States and brings me royalties. And she took me out for lunch, but that's another story. Alicia Duhovne-Ortiz, and she's also a well-known writer. She sent me from France the manuscript of Vamos a Vladivostok, which was later published as El Árbol de la Gitana. I'm not sure if it's been published in English. I didn't do my research. I'm sure it was published in French. And then Irene Martinez, who was in prison with me in Argentina. She's a student. She was a medical student back then. She is a doctor. She is now retired as a doctor, and she writes, and she is a wonderful photographer and artist. She contributed this letter. Then Etelvina Estrada. These are the Argentines. There are 5 from the 35, 5 from Argentina, women from Argentina. Etelvina Estrada is a mother of a disappeared man. And he went into exile to Spain. And then she was born in Germany, right? And then she sent me this poem that we translated, dedicated to Roberto Jorge Santoro, a disappeared poet. Back then, I didn't know of him. There was no internet. There was a lot of the stuff that we now get. It's not easily accessible back then. And Carmen Basche, Carmen went to Argentina as a little girl because her mom had to go into exile from Guatemala. So she was nationalized Argentina, and her sister disappeared in Argentina. And she sent me these letters that I included there. And there is something interesting that I want to share with you, because she's telling me in these letters about history of Argentina that I totally ignored. And she talks about, okay, her mom has to flee because the coup against Arbenz in Guatemala. So they leave and they find asylum in the Argentine embassy. And then she talks about their arrival as refugees into Argentina. After our arrival in Argentina, we were kept in the hotel for immigrants, where they used to house all new immigrants. Each time we entered or left the hotel, we had to go through a checkpoint. Afterwards, each family found their own place. The Eva Perón Foundation helped us a lot with beds, wood mattresses. But the absurd thing was that many exiled men were detained in the Villa Devoto prison. My mother, along with the people from the Liga Lucha por los Derechos del Hombre, Fight for the Rights of Humankind, the only organization that helped the political prisoners, used to visit the detainees. I crossed the bars to the side of the prisoners. That was the jail where I was held after my time as a disappeared in Argentina for about 2 years. I was in that prison. So Carmen, also, I kept this treasure, and that's why I'm saying somebody come help me organize my papers, because this was a letter from 1989. After the publication, I sent Carmen my book, and she says, the book, because I don't speak English, I found a friend so he could translate some of the texts written by the rest of the people, compañeras there. I loved the cover a lot. I hope it travels around the world, and that each person that reads it feels what each of these writers, of these compañeras, was feeling when they wrote it. So a little comic relief. You want to connect comic relief with Rigoberta Menchu's testimony, right? But when Rigoberta Menchú got the Nobel Peace Prize in 1992, the New York Times was looking for a text to publish that was brief. Her book, I, Rigoberta, an Indian woman from Guatemala, originally me llamo Rigoberta Menchú y así me nació la conciencia. Her book was circulating in the States, but it was published in the United Kingdom, and it wasn't circulating that much in English. So what the New York Times finds is my article in You Can Drown the Fire, which is an interview of Rigoberta by Cesar Celala. Cesar Celala is a journalist, a doctor, actually, who did some journalistic work from Argentina. And so he had interviewed Rigoberta and for a newspaper in Mexico. I don't remember. I think it must have been La Opinión. I'm not sure now. So he had interviewed her. And so he sent me this interview. We translated it. We published it here. And when Rigoberta won the Nobel, they were looking for a short and self-contained piece. They didn't want to delve into her book and find one chapter to illustrate who this Nobel Prize awardee was about. So they took my text and they published it in the New York Times without acknowledging or without asking for permission, talking about royalties in Turkey, talk about royalties in the United States back then. They were not even asking for permission, but they said it was published in a book called You Can't Drown the Fire, written by Rigoberta Menchú. So I wrote to the New York Times, they never replied. But in the meanwhile, my father, we are on the phone from Argentina, he's on the phone and he says, pienso que La Nación te plagió. I think that this newspaper, which is a mainstream newspaper in Argentina, committed plagiarism. Pienso que, ¿por qué? Because they have something published that me pasaron cosas como en una película. And that is the title of your piece in your book. Well, right? They had retranslated into Argentine Spanish Rigoberta's interview. So there you had Rigoberta speaking as an Argentine, and for the Argentine readers and audience. So I found, and then of course, Celala was all up in arms, the interviewer and me, and we wrote to La Nación, and we never heard. Of course, saying that the book, this excerpt is from this book, No Podrás Apagar el Fuego, by Rigoberta Menchú. I think I have to look for the article. I was somewhere, but I just recently moved from my office, so you don't want to see the mess I'm immersed in. But it is somewhere, and maybe that it's online now. I don't know. Bien. So now I'm gonna talk a bit about a book I feel very, very happy and very proud. It was published. It's Matilde Melibowski's Circle of Love Over Death. And this is from an interview with her in June 1999. And I was writing about the writings of the mothers of Plaza de Mayo and I wrote about it in some articles and stuff, because what happened is people concentrated a lot on their, demonstrations, their heroism, their agendas, but very few or almost nobody looked at their writings. Matilde produced this work, which is a collection of interviews she, as a mother, did to the other mothers of Plaza de Mayo. And the amazing thing about this book is she weaves the history of the organization Mothers of Plaza de Mayo within these interviews, and she also weaves the history of the country. So it's an amazing work, and it hasn't gotten much dissemination. And one of the reasons I wanted to publish it and she was the one who told me, once it's published in the United States, me van a dar más pelota en Argentina. They're going to pay more attention to me in Argentina if it's published in the United States. And so in this interview, I asked her how that I found it very interesting, because at the beginning of the book, she says, oh, this person, this is how this book starts. She says, and I say, I want to know, who is this person? Who is Nam, the person who asks you to, who inspires you to write a book? And it's a North American, is an American woman. And so I ask her, and she says, this episode is really like a short story, and it ends as a short story or a tale. There was a conference in Buenos Aires in this theater, and at the last minute, as always, because we were always the ones who were called at the last minute, we were invited to participate and to sell our stuff, whatever we had. We had a stand, and we took some books and other things that we were selling. Many people were coming, many women, and it was something related to education. And I saw a lot of women, and there was a stand, a little tiny stand run by some people from Pakistan, by some men from Pakistan. But the guy just had left the stand, and there were some very nice posters there, and he just left to drink something. And I very, very respectfully, I folded all his posters and all the things he had left, and I put them in another place, and I just took over that place because that table was right there at the entrance of the room where all the meetings were taking place. And so she says how this woman, about 40 years old woman who spoke some Spanish, bad Spanish, she said, asked her for a book by the mothers, a book of the mothers. And I was offering her different things, and she was saying, no, there's not this, not this, not this. And then finally, I understood what she wanted was a book produced by the mothers. And so I asked her, what you want is a book that the mothers have written? Yes, she said, in a rush, because we had to go, she had to go inside the meeting place. So I grabbed her by the arm and I said, the book does not exist, it's not here, but we are gonna do it, and I'm gonna do it. And I remember perfectly that she looked at me, she looked at into my eyes, and she pointed at me with her finger, and she said, you are gonna do it. And that's where our relationship ended. And she was the angel of the Annunciation. Is that Annunciation? Angel, like the one who speaks to the Virgin Mary. So I'm saying, what, you don't know who she was? Was that her real name? So here is the challenge. Where is this woman? So she gives me some information, but I haven't found her. She says, I don't know. She had written a book with another professor. And so we say each other, goodbye. And at that moment, there was some stressful moment because the Pakistani guy came back, but he had helped. He had helped with his, because he had left this place that I had taken. And I said, oh, well, I told myself, this is like a story, this is like a tale. But since the moment Graciela disappeared, I've lived through these little tales, these little stories. And I started to flirt with the idea to write a book. Why not? Well, stop, cheating yourself. How are you going to write a book? And I started to relish in that idea, and I made it mine. So then the book was published in Argentina. She sent the manuscript to the contest Casa de las Americas, the most important testimonial contest in Cuba, in Cuba, And he was a finalist. So here is the letter that the testimonial, the judges sent her. She gave me a copy of this letter in April 1991. So it says, as a formidable testimony about the struggle of the mothers and the search of their children under the military dictatorship. It just summarizes what it is, and it talks about the resistance of these mothers. So it calls it a formidable. You cannot deny the value and the strength of this testimony and the importance, and its originality is not in the theme and the subject matter, because it's been disseminated, and it's not only in its perfection and the style, but in the will to save the historical memory, to rescue the historical memory. So here is a less happy letter. This is a rejection letter to me when I offered to this new press the book. Entonces la editorial de New Press said it wasn't important, que era un libro importante, que es el momento, pero que lamentablemente este proyecto no es apropiado para nuestro programa de publicaciones y te deseamos la mejor suerte. So, okay. But I managed to find the publisher. In the year 1979, the last year of the Nicaraguan Revolution, I went to this writers' conference in Nicaragua with a group of writers and publishers from the United States, from small publishing houses, and Sandy Taylor, who ran Curbstone Press, the publishing house that published Roque Dalton stuff here, that published Claribel Alegría, published Benedetti. After many years, Benedetti was finally published in the States. He agreed, and they found these translators. And I remember when I read the translation, I was in dismay. I didn't like the translation. I found so many problems in the translation. And I sent him a very long letter with many corrections and things, but I didn't have time to go and work that much on the translation. Well, the funny thing is now I read that and it's not bad. And so I don't know, something happened to me these years, or I got, a little softer, or I was too, I don't know. There's some evolution in my life as a translator and a reader of translations. But so here we are in, again, building these solidarity networks. I was teaching at American University my first year after graduation. And after getting my PhD, and I organized a conference of women and voices and testimonies. And I had funds to bring Matilde from Argentina. And so here you will see Sylvia was a professor of mine at the Catholic University. She's written extensively too, and she's a very valuable scholar working on Saharan testimonies. And this is Nora Strehilevich, the Argentine compañera, right? And Lidia Evangelista I haven't been in touch with her for the longest time. She was doing her PhD, I think, or she had just gotten her PhD. She came with a bunch of students from the university she was teaching. to this conference. And the arpilleras, the tapestries in the back, are all produced in Chile. You see here talking about the value of arpilleras testimoniales. They dance alone, la cueca sola, and the women dancing by themselves. And this belonged to Veronica de Negri. Veronica de Negri is the mother of Rodrigo Rojas. She is a very dear friend of mine. Veronica is the mother of Rodrigo Rojas, who was burned alive in Chile when he went in search of his roots in 1987. He was 17 years old, and he went back. He came with Veronica, who was a political prisoner and lived in exile with him and his brother, and he went back. He was burned alive with Carmen Gloria Quintana, who survived. And so Veronica has this collection. Now, this is something about the discourse of academia. Very few people acknowledge in academia this collection by Veronica de Negri, despite of the fact that she has traveled with it, and she offers workshops. I brought her to my college and to many other places, like an elderly place for the elderly, also to offer workshops and teach people. But of course, you cannot do this careful work of stitching, 2 hours workshop. So we do it with, we do this talleres con pegamento and glue, and and pieces that we just give them, like students shop. And this is at the end of the semester. Is such an amazing way of relaxing. So for the students, and to be in touch with the world and themselves, doing this, and also connect with this reality. So I have had Veronica, because I have this organization that they said in the introduction, Proyecto Voices of Survivors. So this organization that we created pays for the speakers who come to testify. They pay a decent amount of money for them, because we were sick and tired of being, invited to speak, thinking that we just wanted to tell our stories. And so meanwhile, people in the NGOs were invited to speak and were paid large amounts of money to speak at the universities. Writers, established writers, were paid thousands and thousands of dollars, and they expected that as survivors went because we cared, right? They were killing us. And so they were killing our people. So we created this organization to pay the people who were denouncing these wrongs. Shifting a bit, but this is going back to Dacia Marayni's poem and seeing another community of solidarity there. Checking my time, I think I'm okay. My mom's piece of advice, I said, I have to speak for 2 hours. I get sick of listening to myself. What do I do? And also, how do I fill in 2 hours? So I made this huge slideshow so I can fill in 2 hours. And she says, speak slowly. Speak slowly. If I speak slowly, I fall asleep. So anyways, that digression. And this global anthology is where that poem by Dacia Marayni, translated by Gail Ronsky, was published. And I wanted to go back to it, and I found out yesterday, the day before, doing research, that it has been published in another anthology. We never found out that until yesterday. This is talking about validation from academia and solidarity. Marianne Hirsch is a renowned scholar of the Holocaust. I think she's the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. I think I have to review those notes. But this is what she does. In 2006, I'm invited to write a letter, like those correspondent letters, to the flagship publication of the Modern Languages, PMLA. And so this is from the correspondence with her. She tells me, lo que me dice esta académica renombrada y solidaria que estaba compilando esta edición, la editora estaba compilando esta edición, me dice, hay muchas palabras sin traducir y frases sin traducir en el ensayo que usted escribe, por favor, provea estas traducciones. Okay, so I explained to her what happens, and here you see a little performance that justifies her approval, right? So her approval of this text in Spanish without translation in the PMLA. I don't know if anyone, I mean, I'm pretty sure that this has changed and now it's allowed, but I'm not sure either. And the title, right? When they come killing us, we just negotiate things as survivors. So here, I'm talking about survivors. Sin embargo, I say, however, cuando su dignidad es amenazada, los sobrevivientes se me fue el español. Los sobrevivientes buscan formas interminables de estrategias, cantidad interminable de estrategias para preservar su integridad, para escuchar y respetar estas contribuciones de los sobrevivientes al debate. Eso no significa comprender sus palabras. So to listen to and respect survivors' contributions to the debate does not always mean to understand their words. Sometimes it is a matter of watching their actions, of analyzing their interventions at a semiotic level. So what I do that now is an intervention at a semiotic level, and I just write in Spanish. Cuando vienen matando, uno debe recurrir a todo para parar el estropicio. Negocia alianzas, calla con frecuencia, grita más de lo que le da la garganta, se tira al piso y finge estar muerto, acusa dolor donde no duele, como por ejemplo el Mingo en la tortura gritaba cuando le picaneaban los pies, no las encías, siempre proteger las encías, pero cuando después de la derrota pasan años, 20, 30, 40, y viene algo que huele ligeramente a aquello que llamábamos revolución, cuando nadie ya teme buscar huesos, palabras perdidas, homenajear al vencido, entonces hay que decirlo todo, sin miedo, sin arrepentimientos, con la certeza de que no hay redención posible. I mentioned here how in the moment of being killed or being tortured, the victim uses all kinds of strategies and can scream more than would, or it can be silent, often. I mean, here I'm talking about the victim of torture, but I'm also talking about the survivor who is in the academic world. And here is a very graphic mention of my husband. El Mingo is his nickname when he was a political prisoner. And he told me he would always claim that when they were using the electric prod, he would always scream when they touch places where it didn't hurt, and not scream when they touch places that hurt. Try to stop his screams. So he would scream when they touch his feet and not when he touched his gums, where they applied the electric, when they applied the electric prod to his gums, which was the most sensible part, more than the feet. So I'm talking about, yeah, you have always to protect your gums. But then many years pass and you just can say everything. You just don't need to negotiate anymore. It's a time in which people are not afraid of finding the remains. They're not afraid of finding, of paying tribute to the defeated one, to us, right? And so we should, there is no possible redemption, I'm saying. So we can tell all. It's a performance. It's a performance and this amazing scholar in solidarity, brilliant, Marianne Hirsch, accepted and had to probably fight with people in the editorial board to allow for this in the PMLA. Well, this is the essay that I brought to Argentina in 2006 and produced these people to leave the room where I was presented. Let me try to see how am I doing. Good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about communities of solidarity. That's a term that I started to use in an article I just wrote for the university. Let's see where it is. It's a museum in Arizona that is going to have an exhibit next year of posters produced during the dictatorship in Chile, mostly posters and some from the Condor plan, but most are posters produced in the United States about the dictatorship in Chile. And so they're having this show, and they are having a book to accompany it. And they invited me, they invited Ariel Dorfman, invited other people to write articles. So in the article that I wrote, half of the article is Veronica de Negri's testimony, her words. And I was freaking out. I said, are they going to allow this? Are they going to allow me to get away with this co-labor action? I call them co-labor actions when we are together at the same place. And her text is there. I'm not mediating it. She is writing with me there. And they allowed it. And so that's where it's going to come out in a book next year, I think. I'll give you more information if you want it. Okay, so here are the different, and I refer you to Maria Laura Spoturno's recent essay, because she really goes into this and has done so much research of things that I didn't even remember happened. And they did happen. She is connecting them and analyzing it so deeply. So, but these are the lesbian cultural workers who helped disseminate, validate my voice as a poet. Sister Fire was a women's festival in Washington. Sweet Honey in the Rock sang my poem, Song of the Exiled, at Carnegie Hall. And then Susana Blausten Muñoz and Lourdes Portillo are the authors of a text that is barely known in Argentina as a documentary that was nominated to the Academy Award the year the official story won the Academy Award. And that documentary was going to be about me. And a torturer who was speaking, and it was going to be a counterpoint of our two voices. And it was going to talk about the mothers of Plaza de Mayo. And I said, Susana, this documentary has to be about the mothers. And so, but she hadn't been in Argentina, so she traveled to Argentina. And of course, the documentary became Las Madres, the mothers of Plaza de Mayo. And, but while doing the documentary, she says, I have these friends in San Francisco, in the community, in the lesbian community, they're looking for a manuscript. They're looking for a manuscript by a Latina woman. And I said, well, I have this testimony. I never told you, but I had sent it to the Casa de las Americas Award, where Matilde was a finalist. But another year I had sent it, and it got lost in the diplomatic pouch somehow. And months later, I received an apology from the contest saying that it had arrived after the contest had finished, and they were sorry. So that was with La Escuelita. Anyways, so Susana said, and then I sent it to Clear's Press. So here is more communities of solidarity. Well, back then it was the lesbian community, and now it's LGBTQ plus and I and other words. But back then, even the gay community in Washington, D.C. was not in solidarity with the lesbian community. They were too concerned about their own power, about their own, they were truly, I mean, the lesbian community was much more open back then. But now is my book with Martina was published by Clears. Clears has been asking me for years, for another book. They wanted a memoir. And so the closest thing to a memoir that I can do is this, working with someone else and talking with someone else about our lives and her Martina's transition. So now is where it's my last book, which came out in 2019. So the pandemic came afterwards and not much could happen with that book. I'm not naming all the people who have helped me, but here is Joy Harjo writing the blurb for the little school. Here is a mention of my being part of Amnesty International's board of directors, where when Amnesty International was 400,000 members in the United States and had a budget of $21 million back then. So, okay, some names, right, of people who have been also in these communities of solidarity, have published my work, have invited me to their universities. Amy Kaminsky, we just recently did something. She said she might join us from some hotel room. She wanted to be part of this too, but I'm not sure she could do it. But also, I want to mention Bell Hooks because I never met Bell Hooks, but there's a story with my daughter Ruthie when she was used to hear me talk about these things all the time. She was a bit sick of all this too, and then she's in college, and she's at Rutgers University. And one day she calls me. There was no cell phones. She calls me from a payphone, and she says, "Ma'am, guess what? I'm at the library. I'm reading because my professor wants me to read Bell Hooks. I'm reading Bell Hooks, and she mentions you." And so I guess that was the moment she realized that what her mom was doing there in this other world. Anyways, then there were the and there are the students, the many students. And this is I try to get this digitalized, but the author, Leora Kisieplinski-Simet, she told me she doesn't have it. She has it in a CD. She was a college student, undergrad, went to Argentina, and they interviewed the mothers of Plaza de Mayo in their workshop, Eve de Bonafini, and the writing workshop in the Casa de las Madres. And that was like a revelation, right? And so if you see the back of her video, she talks about poets. And the poets included here are Marjorie Aguzin, of course, Eve de Bonafini, Juana de Pargament. So you see here the discourse of solidarity at work, right? I guess I'm past. And then we have these women writers who are also political prisoners, and these are very valuable works. They have their own networks. We can collaborate. We appear in panels together. Maria del Carmen Sillato is one of those scholars who was invited me to talk at her school, but she was not talking about her own testimony of giving birth as a disappeared person. And this is the book that is now being translated, Dialogues of Love Against Silence. And then Cosame, Alicia Cosame, Paula Simon has just published, or a couple of years ago, an interview with Nora Strehilevich, who is also here in this amazing network. And then, of course, los imprescindibles, right? We cannot go anywhere without you, translators, okay? And this is my next project. This is when I retired in my class, Latin American Writers. I started this 40 en sus 40 project, which plays in Spanish with the quarantine concept, but in English is 40 in their 40s, and it's just lost there. And these were poets of the Americas, and my students translated their work, and we went on Zoom and we talked to them. My students talked to them, and eventually I'll publish this anthology of Latina writers, poets in the States, and women from the Americas. And we still are looking for a few to complete the 40. So here is my daughter, and this is the program. But this took place a year ago, so you're not cordially invited, but I'll have the videos. I have to work on the editing of the videos. I think my time is up, and more than up right now. I got a little lost. There are some questions and answers in the chat, and we have to cut with time enough for you to take a little break. Okay, this is very interesting. An example of the Solidarity Reds in New Technologies could be the blog, Ya no nos callamos más. We are not silent anymore. Ay, gracias, Marta. Read that. And are there more questions? I'm missing there. Yes. Okay. So, saludos desde Vietnam. Okay, someone who is in Entre Ríos. Gracias por el saludo. Y la experiencia. Oh, Bell Hooks will be in the seminars in September. Okay, no sabía eso. The links.
She was meant to be, but she died. I'm afraid. Yeah, she passed away. Sorry, but she was meant to be.
I didn't know.
Yeah, I didn't know either.
Oh my gosh! Yeah. And I live in the States. This is sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh, this is so bad.
Yeah, I think it
so.
wasn't
Here is a quote by her. Sent by Gloria Jean Watkin, University of Southern California, a quote, "The links between race, class, and gender from the point of view of the analysis of the production and perpetuation of systems of oppression and class domination." Okay. Examples from the first part. I'm so glad I'm seeing an example, this blog. Okay, so there are no more questions, I think, and I think it's my time, right, to, or we have a couple of minutes for some comment or question from the moderators. Gracias.
Oh, thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Alicia.
Wonderful presentation, really wonderful. Yes, there are no questions. So we are leaving this with this Zoom and just have a little break and then start again at 6 on the dot. Thank you again, Dr. Alicia Partnoy. Was great presentation. I write down a lot.
Thank you for bringing me back to Argentina with my scholarship and my rustiness. Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao.